Hello, I'm Keith, K.C. Design Concepts, Chief Engineer of Hyde Motorworks, and I'm here to unveil the R1 Supercharger. It's a centrifugal or centrifugal, depending how you want to pronounce it. Rotrex C38 Supercharger that we're installing on the E90. Personally, this one right here is a 328i. But also fits the 330, basically the same engine. Most commonly known as the N52. The car that I have is, because of where I live, is the super ultra low emission vehicle or Solvay engine, which is the N51. It just has some extra emission equipment and a different tune in it to lower the emissions outputs. Basically, it's still the same engine. This also fits the Nebraska or N53 engine. Okay, and this right here is the rough prototype bracket. If anybody knows me, I like doing rough prototypes for mock-up. Obviously, I cut this a little bit too low, but I mostly wanted to get the right angle and the right height on the supercharger that would fit the car the best and fit the engine the best, and make routing the charge pipes and everything as straightforward and easy as possible. Like I said, this is just a 3D printed version of the C38. It's an exact duplicate, and it's trying to make it as easy as possible to mount on the car. There's another block like this that bolts to the lower alternator, 2 bolt holes, mounting points. Ideally, it's going to be all one piece, either machined out of one piece or welded together, depending on how we end up finishing it. What ends up working out the best, it's going to be the strongest. The main front plate is 10 millimeters, which is what Rotrex recommends for this particular supercharger. It is going to use the factory drive belt, just longer, coming up off of the power steering pump, down there, up over the supercharger, around the other pulley, alternator, and follow on with the rest. The supercharger is capable of a lot more boost than this completely stock unopened engine is capable of handling. So it will definitely be using the bypass valve to help limit boost, and I'm most likely, when I go to run it on here, I'm going to use a larger pulley on the superchargers just to keep it down a little bit. Rotrex says that this supercharger is capable of well over 20 pounds of boost. That would definitely be way too much for this particular engine. Part of the development was that these have these oil ports here. They're supposed to be, this surface should be straight up. Rotrex said I can go a maximum of 15 degrees off from one side to the other. I'm well within that right now, in about 8-degree angle. And the tricky part with that is the discharge on the supercharger. To run low boost without an intercooler, we're going to be including a charge pipe very similar to this. This is actually from our Harbinger, and that's where the bypass valve would attach. This is really easy to attach no matter what angle that's on. But if you're planning on running higher boost with an intercooler, it helps to have the discharge of the supercharger pointing down in an area that gives you free access to run charge pipes to an intercooler and then back to the throttle body again. The inlet of the supercharger is going to be a pretty simple 180 out of here and around to about this area. It'll be fairly short. We're also developing a mass airflow sensor housing that can be installed here, but it'll come out and it'll point down slightly so that you can put the air filter down in here. And the reason why we're going to develop a mass airflow sensor housing is because, unlike a lot of the earlier BMWs, the mass airflow sensor housing on the E60 and E90s. It's part of the airbox. It doesn't separate. I mean, I'm sure somebody could cut it off and use it, but I don't know if that would be ideal. Okay, time to geek out a little bit about the Rotrex Supercharger. They use a very unique drive assembly built into them. Most other centrifugal or centrifugal, depending on what you want to call it, that use gears or planetary gears or some other helical gear setup, that tends to make them a little noisy even when you're not making boost, you're just cruising down the road. These superchargers, I know from experience on other platforms, when you're driving down the road, highway, whatever, you don't even know that they're there. Obviously, when you step on the gas and bring the RPMs up, you do hear them, but that's what makes them really interesting. And they're a semi-self-contained unit. What I mean by that is you don't have to tap an oil feed from your engine to feed the supercharger and then have to run a drain back. None of that. The superchargers that you'll be getting are brand new from Rotrex. They come with a warranty. They will also come with your coolant lines, well, oil supply and return lines, a reservoir, and a cooler, and their own, they call it traction oil. You can only use their oil, and there's a very specific initial startup procedure that you must follow. And as long as you follow that procedure and install the coolant lines, the oil lines, and so on, per their recommendations, they're very reliable. You won't have any problems with them. And they say, and they recommend changing the oil in it every so many tens of thousands of miles, or but that'll all come with the supercharger. Skip past, you know. This is the C38. As you can see, they have different versions of it. They have the C38 61, 71, 81, 91/92, which is the largest. Maximum pressure ratio ranges from 1.9 up to, 2.9 up to 2.94. They give you their rated horsepower. You notice even the small 61, which is the smaller of the housings, they use it, it's the same size gear, or their traction drive assembly, that's the same size, but the compressor housing and compressor wheel itself is a different size depending on what you're looking for. The smaller one is rated from 272 horsepower up to about 550, 557 it says. The reason why they put a range in there is because it's going to depend on what engine you're putting it on and what supporting modifications you're doing to it. To have a supercharger or any type of performance part that says that this is what your horsepower is going to be is extremely unrealistic. It's going to depend on a lot of other factors, what the engine was making before you installed that part, as well as who tuned it and how good they were at tuning it. So there's too many variables. This is, and it's all the way up to 720 horsepower. Personally, I haven't tuned an engine or worked on one that was making 720. I did work on a Fox body Mustang that had a heavily modified engine. It was making about 650. So that's just stating that it's capable of flowing that much air to support that power. It comes with the pulley adapter. There's different size, they call them pulley rings, from a 70 millimeter all the way up to 110 millimeter. It's an 8-rib belt. Obviously the BMW uses a 6-rib belt, so 2 of the ribs you won't be using. The larger the pulley, the diameter, the lower the boost. The input shaft speed maximum is 12,000 RPMs. This N51 that I have, I don't think I'm going to be pushing it that far. Peak impeller speed 90,000 RPMs. And remember, that's the peak input shaft speed, so that's depending on this pulley diameters that they have here. And I believe the crankshaft pulley on the engine is, I believe it's about 120 to 130 millimeter diameter. So if you were to use, say, the 110 millimeter on the supercharger, the supercharger is going to be spinning slightly faster than the crankshaft. So say 6,000 crankshaft RPMs. I haven't done the math on it, but the input shaft of the supercharger is going to probably be spinning around 7,000, which is nowhere near the 12,000 maximum. Obviously, if you go up to the 70 millimeter, yeah, you're going to be pushing the maximum RPMs of the input of the supercharger. And conversion table for anybody, you know, kilograms per second to pounds per minute conversion and so on. Kilograms per second to CFMs. Here's what the compressor map looks like, one of them. And their pressure ratios, and this is at 15 degrees centigrade, which is fairly cold. 17? 15. This is the, let's see, which one was this? Oh, that's the 61. That's the smaller one. Okay. This is the 71 compressor map. Wish I could show the entire map on this screen. But yeah, I'm still not the greatest with computers. And this is the 81 compressor map. As you can see, the higher up you go, the faster you'll see a pressure increase, because it is a larger supercharger and you spin it and it's going to move more air. And this is the largest one. You can see it's got a pretty broad peak. But also, because these superchargers are centrifugal, whichever you want to call it, they have a rising boost curve. What that means is the higher you rev the engine, the more boost it's going to produce. So you step on the gas at, say, 2,000 RPMs. Let's just say the blower drive that you have on there, you're making like 3 pounds of boost at like 2,000 RPMs, but by the time you hit 6,000, you might be making 15, 16 pounds of boost. But this is going to depend on which compressor, which size you get from the 61 all the way up to the 92, and what drive pulley you put on the front of the supercharger. Of course, if you're doing a max effort, yeah, you're going to go with the biggest one, biggest supercharger, the biggest compressor housing and compressor wheel with the smallest pulley. And you're definitely going to want to use an intercooler. The superchargers are extremely efficient. I think they had the efficient ratings up here. The traction drive, I think, is something like 97% efficient. Yeah, the drive efficiency, 97%, which is really, really good. So that means the power that you're taking away from the engine to spin the compressor, 97% of that is being used to generate boost to make even more power. So that's a good number to have. And honestly, there's really no such thing as a 100% efficiency. Unfortunately, human beings by nature, we are not perfect, and everything we make is not going to be perfect. So we're not going to ever see that 100% efficiency, especially across the broad range. And there's the orientation that you can change the compressor, and it's a a rough idea of what, that's one of the larger compressor, drive pulleys, what it will look like. And they even give you a map to give you a rough idea of what size you would benefit from with each version of the C38, which pulley would be the best suited for that for a certain RPM. You can calculate what your maximum engine RPMs are, so you'll know what pulley to use with it. Now, obviously, if you're just looking for a little extra fun on the street, you're not going to want to use the smallest pulley and then try to use a bypass valve to bleed off the extra boost, because then that's just a waste. You're taking power away from the engine. I call it parasitic losses, to spin the supercharger up to a point to say make 22 pounds of boost, but then you're using a bypass valve to bleed that boost off because it's too much for the engine. You're actually going to lose power that way, rather than size the pulley for your application, so that way you don't have to bleed off boost. All right, I hope that covers everything, and everybody stay safe and have a supercharged day.